Welcome, curious soul, to the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. If you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place. Tonight, we're not just going to tell stories. We're going to descend into the Appalachian dark, a place where the trees whisper and the ground holds secrets older than memory. We'll uncover 3 terrifying tales that locals only speak of by the flickering light of a campfire. Stories of hikers who vanish without a trace, of phantoms with no faces, and of strange hypnotic lights that seem to promise safety, but instead lead you straight to your doom. So settle in, turn down the lights, and ask yourself one simple question before we begin. Are you brave enough to hear what really waits in the trees? The Appalachian Mountains are an ancient and sprawling wilderness, stretching for nearly 2,000 miles from the deep south all the way up to Canada. Their ridges are weathered and worn, older than bones, carved by time into a labyrinth of peaks, valleys, and deep, isolated hollows. For centuries, these remote corners of the earth have served as a refuge for secrets, becoming places where the lost are swallowed whole by the landscape, where strange occurrences are so common they barely make the local papers anymore. It's a place where the normal rules of our world seem to bend and sometimes break completely, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions and a lingering sense of dread that seeps into the very soil. Imagine this for a moment. You're hiking on a well-marked trail, the sun is shining, and you decide to step off the path for just a moment to look at an unusual flower. You're gone for maybe 30 seconds, but when you turn back, the trail has vanished. It's just gone. Or picture this. You're walking through a clearing covered in a fresh blanket of snow, and you see a single set of footprints leading out into the middle of the field, and then they just stop. There are no other tracks, no sign of a struggle. Just footprints that end as if the person who made them was plucked straight up into the sky. And then, as night falls, you hear a familiar voice calling your name from the deepest, darkest part of the woods. And you realize, with a jolt of pure terror, that it's your own voice. These are not just campfire tales spun to scare teenagers. For some, they are terrifyingly real experiences. The mountains hold countless stories of people who have walked into the woods and have never been seen again, their disappearances leaving behind a void of confusion and heartbreak. But perhaps even more unsettling are the stories of those who do return. They come back broken, their eyes wide with a terror they cannot articulate, unable or unwilling to speak of what they saw in the deep woods. Why do some people never return, and what horrors do the others witness that silence them forever? Tonight you'll hear 3 of these stories, and you can decide for yourself whether they're just myths or something far more sinister. Our first story begins with a man named Paul Garrison, a seasoned park ranger who had spent the better part of 3 decades working in the vast, untamed wilderness of the Appalachian Mountains. Paul was not the kind of man who was easily spooked. He'd seen it all, or so he thought. He'd tracked mountain lions, navigated through blinding blizzards, and rescued countless hikers who had underestimated the unforgiving nature of the terrain. He knew these woods like the back of his hand, every trail, every creek, every hidden clearing. But nothing in his long and storied career could have prepared him for what he was about to find deep within a section of the forest he thought he knew so well. One crisp autumn afternoon, Paul was conducting a routine patrol, checking for signs of illegal trapping or logging in a remote area of the park that was miles away from any designated trail. The air was still, the silence broken only by the crunch of fallen leaves under his boots. It was this profound silence that first put him on edge. The woods were usually alive with the sounds of birds and scurrying animals, but today, an unnatural quiet had fallen over the landscape. It was a heavy, expectant silence, the kind that often precedes a storm. As he ventured deeper into the woods, the feeling of being watched began to creep up his spine, a primal instinct telling him that something was profoundly wrong. He pushed aside a thicket of rhododendron and stepped into a small, previously undiscovered clearing. And that's when he saw it. Standing in the middle of the clearing, completely isolated and leading to absolutely nothing, was a staircase. It was immaculately clean, constructed from what looked like polished granite, a stark and jarring contrast to the wild, overgrown nature of its surroundings. There was no house, no foundation, no ruins. Just this solitary, perfect staircase, ascending into the empty air. It was as if someone had carefully plucked it from a grand mansion and placed it delicately in the heart of the wilderness, an object so out of place It felt like a glitch in reality. Paul stood frozen for a long moment, his mind struggling to process the scene before him. He cautiously approached the structure, his hand resting on the handle of his service weapon. The craftsmanship was flawless, the steps smooth and cool to the touch. He circled it, examining it from every angle, searching for any logical explanation. Was it part of an old homestead? He checked the ground for any signs of a foundation or rubble, but there was nothing. The forest floor was undisturbed, covered in a thick layer of moss and leaves that looked like it hadn't been touched in 100 years. The staircase simply existed, defiant of all logic, a silent and imposing monument to the unknown. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air ran down Paul's spine. He had heard whispers among the old-timers in the nearby towns, strange tales of inexplicable things found deep in the woods. They spoke of lone doorways standing without walls, of chimneys rising from the earth with no fireplace attached, and most commonly of staircases in the middle of the forest. Most rangers dismissed these as local folklore, the tall tales of isolated communities. But standing there, staring at the impossible object before him, Paul felt a creeping sense of dread. The stories always came with a stark warning: whatever you do, don't touch them and never, ever climb them. He pulled out his radio to call it in, to report this bizarre discovery to his supervisor. He raised the radio to his mouth, but all that came through the speaker was a burst of loud, piercing static. He tried again, switching channels, but the result was the same. It was as if the staircase itself was emitting some kind of interference, creating a dead zone around it. This only amplified his unease. He was completely alone out here, miles from anyone, with a silent, inexplicable structure that seemed to defy the very laws of physics. The feeling of being watched intensified, and he found himself scanning the dense tree line, expecting to see a pair of eyes staring back at him. Despite the growing fear in his gut, Paul's curiosity and duty as a ranger compelled him to investigate further. He took out his camera to document the scene, snapping pictures from various angles. As he focused the lens, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. The area around the base of the staircase was completely devoid of life. While the rest of the clearing was teeming with moss, ferns, and wildflowers, a perfect circle of barren earth extended about 10 feet out from the bottom step. It was as if the staircase was radiating some kind of energy that repelled all living things, a sterile zone in the heart of the vibrant forest. The silence was what unnerved him the most. It wasn't just quiet. It was a complete absence of sound. No birds chirping, no squirrels chattering, not even the rustle of wind in the trees. It was a vacuum, a pocket of dead air that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He could hear his own heart pounding in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the oppressive stillness. The old warning echoed in his mind: don't climb them. He had no intention of doing so, but an irrational part of his brain felt a strange pull, a bizarre and unwelcome temptation to place his foot on that first step and see where it led. Paul spent what felt like an hour documenting the sight, his initial shock giving way to a professional, albeit deeply unnerved, sense of purpose. He took measurements, sketched the location in his notebook, and collected soil samples from the barren patch of earth around the base. Throughout it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trespassing, that he had stumbled upon something sacred or forbidden, something that was not meant for human eyes. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows through the trees, and Paul knew he needed to start heading back before darkness fell. He gave the staircase one last look, a silent granite enigma that offered no answers. As he turned to leave, a flicker of movement at the top of the stairs caught his eye. He froze, his heart leaping into his throat. He squinted, trying to make out what he had seen. For a split second, it looked like a person was standing there, a dark, humanoid shape silhouetted against the graying sky. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, a trick of the light, perhaps. Or was it? He raised his binoculars, his hands trembling slightly, and scanned the top step. There was nothing there, just empty air. He tried to rationalize it, telling himself his mind was playing tricks on him, that the isolation and the strangeness of the situation were getting to him. But then he heard it. A faint whispering sound, like the rustling of dry leaves, seemed to emanate from the top of the staircase. It wasn't the wind. The air around him was perfectly still. It was a soft, sibilant sound, almost like a voice. But the words were unintelligible, a language he didn't recognize. The sound was hypnotic, drawing him in, and he found himself taking a step closer against his better judgment. The whispers grew slightly louder, beckoning, and a strange, cold dread mixed with an inexplicable curiosity washed over him. What was up there? What was making that sound? Suddenly, a loud snap of a twig from the woods behind him broke the spell. Paul spun around, his hand flying to his sidearm, his heart hammering against his ribs. He scanned the dense undergrowth, his eyes darting back and forth, searching for the source of the sound. He saw nothing but shadows and trees, but the noise had been enough to shatter the strange trance he had been falling into. The primal fear returned with a vengeance, screaming at him to get out, to run and not look back. He took one last fearful glance at the staircase, where the whispering had now ceased, and then he bolted, crashing through the forest with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. Paul didn't stop running until the oppressive silence of the clearing was replaced by the familiar sounds of the forest, until he could no longer feel the weight of that unnatural stillness pressing down on him. He burst back onto the main trail, gasping for breath, his mind reeling from the experience. He leaned against a tree, trying to calm his racing heart, trying to make sense of what he had just witnessed. The silent staircase, the radio static, the barren ground, the fleeting figure, the whispering. It all felt like a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by exhaustion or dehydration. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it had been real. When he finally made it back to the ranger station, he was pale and visibly shaken. His supervisor, a pragmatic man named Dave, listened to his story with a skeptical frown. When Paul showed him the pictures, Dave's expression shifted from disbelief to bewilderment. The photographs were clear and undeniable. There, on the digital screen, was the impossible staircase, standing stark and gray in the middle of the woods. Dave had no explanation, but he agreed that the area needed to be cordoned off and investigated further. The next morning, they assembled a small team of 4 experienced rangers, including Paul, to return to the site. Paul led them back, following the path he had taken the day before. He was confident in his tracking skills, but as they got closer to the location, the landscape seemed to have changed. Trees seemed to have moved. Familiar landmarks were gone, and the small clearing he had stumbled upon was nowhere to be found. They spent the entire day searching, crisscrossing the area in a grid pattern. But it was useless. The clearing, and the mysterious staircase within it, had vanished, as if it had never been there at all. The other rangers began to look at Paul with suspicion, wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. Defeated and confused, they returned to the station. Paul's credibility was questioned, and he became the subject of quiet ridicule among his colleagues. But Paul knew what he saw. The experience left a permanent mark on him. For weeks afterward, he was plagued by nightmares. He would dream of the staircase, of the whispers calling to him, of climbing the steps and stepping off the top into an endless black void. He became withdrawn and paranoid, constantly feeling like he was being watched, even in the safety of his own home. He started seeing fleeting dark shapes out of the corner of his eye, shadows that would disappear the moment he turned to look. The aftermath of his encounter sent Paul Garrison into a downward spiral. The man who was once a confident and respected veteran of the National Park Service became a shell of his former self. He requested a transfer to a desk job, unable to face the woods he had once loved. The forest was no longer a place of peace for him. It had become a place of deep-seated terror. He couldn't shake the memory of the whispers, or the chilling feeling that something from that clearing had followed him back. His family grew worried as he became more isolated, often staring into space for long periods. His eyes filled with a distant, haunted look. The photographs he took were the only proof he had, but even they became a source of torment. He would stare at them for hours, trying to find some clue, some rational explanation. One night, while zooming in on a picture of the top of the staircase, he saw it. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a slight distortion in the pixels, a shimmering in the air just above the top step. It was the exact spot where he thought he had seen the figure. He showed it to his supervisor, but it was too ambiguous to be considered evidence. To everyone else, it was just a digital artifact. But to Paul, it was confirmation that he hadn't been hallucinating. The legend of the staircases in the woods is a persistent one in Appalachian folklore, and Paul's story is just one of many. Search and rescue officers have shared similar, often anonymous, accounts online. They speak of finding these structures in the most remote parts of the wilderness, of the strange dead zones that surround them, and of the overwhelming sense of dread they inspire. The stories are all eerily similar, and they all carry the same grave warning: stay away. Some theories suggest they are glitches in our reality, doorways to other dimensions, or remnants of ancient, forgotten rituals. Whatever they are, they don't belong in our world. Paul Garrison never fully recovered. He retired early, a broken man, haunted by what he saw. He never set foot in the woods again. The question that lingers is a deeply unsettling one. What are these staircases? Where do they lead? And what happens to the people who ignore the warnings? Who give in to that strange, beckoning curiosity and decide to climb them? The forest keeps its secrets well, and the silent granite steps offer no answers. They just stand there waiting for the next person to stumble upon them. So let me ask you, if you found a staircase in the woods leading to nowhere, would you be able to resist the urge to climb it? Would you risk it? Our second story takes us to the fog-shrouded valleys of West Virginia, to a place known locally as Spruce Hollow. For generations, parents in the nearby town of Blackwood have used a chilling legend to keep their children from wandering into the woods after dark. They tell the story of the Lantern Man, a spectral figure said to roam the hollows on moonless nights. The legend says he was a coal miner from the 19th century who was caught in a mine collapse and died searching for a way out, his lantern the only light in the suffocating darkness. Now his spirit is said to wander the woods, his lantern still lit, eternally searching for the home he can never reach. The legend comes with a dire warning. They say the light from his lantern is hypnotic, that it draws you in, promising a path to safety. But if you follow it, the Lantern Man will lead you deeper and deeper into the woods, off the trails and into treacherous ravines until you are hopelessly lost. Some versions of the tale say he leads you to the site of the old collapsed mine, where your own spirit will become trapped with his. It was a story told around campfires and on front porches, a piece of local folklore meant to inspire a healthy fear of the dark, sprawling wilderness. For most, it was just that, a story. But for three teenagers, Liam, Maya, and Chloe, the legend was a challenge. It was late October, the air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the thrill of Halloween was upon them. Liam, the de facto leader of the group and an aspiring filmmaker, saw the legend as the perfect subject for a found-footage horror movie. He proposed a dare. They would go into Spruce Hollow on the night before Halloween, armed with his new video camera, and try to capture footage of the infamous Lantern Man. Maya, always up for an adventure, agreed immediately. Chloe, however, was more hesitant. She had grown up hearing the stories from her grandmother, and a part of her believed they were more than just folklore. Despite her reservations, Chloe didn't want to be left out or be called a coward, so she reluctantly agreed to go along. The plan was simple. They would hike to a well-known overlook in Spruce Hollow, set up camp, and wait. Liam was confident they wouldn't see anything, but he figured they could fake some spooky footage and still have a great story to tell. As they packed their bags with flashlights, snacks, and warm clothes, Liam made sure his camera was fully charged. He was determined to capture something memorable that night, but he had. For our third and final story, we're heading deep into the heart of the Appalachian Range, to a place called Black Bear Ridge. Now, this isn't a spot you'll find on any official map. It's one of those local names, a stretch of dense, old-growth forest known more for its eerie silence than its scenic views. The kind of place where the trees grow so thick they seem to swallow the sunlight whole, leaving the forest floor in a perpetual state of twilight. It's here that our story's main character, a man named Caleb Ward, decided to go for a solo hike one crisp autumn afternoon. Caleb was an experienced outdoorsman, someone who felt more at home with the rustle of leaves under his boots than the bustle of a city sidewalk. He knew these woods, or at least he thought he did. Caleb had packed light for what he intended to be a simple 4-hour loop. He had his water, a compass, some trail mix, and a small first aid kit. The air was cool and carried the earthy scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, a smell Caleb had always found comforting. He parked his truck at a familiar, unmarked trailhead, a small dirt pull-off just off a winding mountain road. As he stepped out, he couldn't help but notice how unusually quiet it was. There were no birds chirping, no squirrels chattering in the branches, just a profound, almost heavy silence that seemed to press in on him from all sides. He shrugged it off as just a quirk of the mountain, a momentary lull in nature's symphony. He started down the trail, his boots crunching rhythmically on the fallen leaves. The path was narrow and overgrown in places, a clear sign that not many people ventured this far into the woods. But that was exactly what Caleb liked about it. The solitude, the feeling of being completely disconnected from the modern world. For the first hour, everything was normal. He navigated the familiar twists and turns, his mind at ease as he took in the rugged beauty of the ancient landscape. The trees here were giants, their gnarled branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers, draped in shawls of moss and lichen. It was a place that felt timeless, a world away from everything else. But as he ventured deeper, a strange feeling began to creep into the back of his mind. It started as a subtle prickle on his neck, the kind you get when you feel like you're being watched. Caleb would stop, scan the dense tree line, and see nothing but the shifting shadows in the deep, dark woods. He tried to dismiss it as his imagination playing tricks on him, a common occurrence when you're alone in such a vast and silent place. Yet the feeling didn't go away. In fact, with every step he took, it grew stronger, more insistent, transforming from a vague unease into a palpable sense of being stalked by something unseen. Caleb pressed on, trying to shake the unnerving sensation. He picked up his pace, hoping that a bit of physical exertion would clear his head. He rounded a sharp bend in the trail, and suddenly found himself stepping into a small, circular clearing. This was odd. He had hiked this general area dozens of times before, and he couldn't recall ever coming across this particular spot. The clearing was perfectly round, almost unnaturally so, and the ground was covered in a thick carpet of dead, brown leaves. In the center of this clearing stood a solitary, dead tree, its barkless, white branches clawing at the overcast sky. It was a stark and unsettling sight, like a bone jutting out from the earth. He paused at the edge of the clearing, his hand instinctively going to the small knife he kept on his belt. The feeling of being watched was now overwhelming, a heavy pressure building in the air around him. His eyes darted around the perimeter, searching the shadows for any sign of movement, any animal that might be tracking him. But there was nothing. The woods remained utterly still and silent. The only sound was the frantic thumping of his own heart against his ribs. He knew he should turn back, that every instinct was screaming at him to get out of there. But a morbid curiosity, a strange pull he couldn't explain, kept him rooted to the spot. And that's when he saw her. Standing at the far edge of the clearing, partially obscured by the dead tree, was the figure of a woman. She was wearing what looked like a simple, old-fashioned dress, the color of faded calico, something that looked like it belonged in a different century. Her hair was long and dark, hanging limply around her shoulders. She was standing perfectly still, her posture rigid, her head slightly bowed as if she were studying the ground in front of her. Caleb's initial fear was momentarily replaced by confusion. What was a woman dressed like that doing all the way out here, alone and so deep in the woods? He called out, his voice sounding small and weak in the oppressive silence. "Hello? Are you all right, ma'am?" He took a hesitant step into the clearing, his boots making a loud crunching sound that seemed to echo in the stillness. The woman didn't respond. She didn't move a muscle. It was as if she hadn't heard him at all. He called out again, a little louder this time, his voice laced with a growing sense of dread. "Ma'am, do you need help?" It was then that she slowly, very slowly, began to lift her head. And as she did, Caleb felt a wave of pure, ice-cold terror wash over him, a primal fear that seized every muscle in his body and held him captive. As the woman raised her head, Caleb's breath hitched in his throat. The world seemed to slow down, every detail etching itself into his memory with horrifying clarity. The light in the clearing dimmed, as if a cloud had passed over the sun, plunging the scene into a deeper, more sinister shade. The air grew cold, so cold that he could see his own breath fogging in front of him. The woman's head moved with a slow, unnatural smoothness, like a puppet being manipulated by an unseen hand. Her long, dark hair fell away from her face, and Caleb finally saw it. Or rather, he saw what wasn't there. Where her face should have been, there was nothing. It was a complete and utter blank. A smooth, pale, and featureless expanse of skin like an unfinished mannequin or a worn-down stone. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, no contours of any kind. Just a horrifying, empty void where a human face was supposed to be. Caleb stood frozen, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight before him. It was a violation of nature, a thing that simply should not exist. The terror was so absolute, so paralyzing that he couldn't even scream. All he could do was stare at the blank, awful visage of the woman standing just a few dozen feet away from him. Then, The faceless thing took a step towards him. It was a slow, shuffling step, the hem of its old-fashioned dress dragging through the dead leaves. With each step, it made a soft, wet scraping sound that sent shivers down Caleb's spine. His survival instincts finally kicked in, breaking through the paralysis of fear. He didn't think. He just reacted. He spun around and ran, crashing back through the undergrowth and onto the trail, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He didn't dare look back. He could hear the shuffling sound behind him, getting closer, faster than he thought possible. He ran blindly, his lungs burning, branches whipping at his face and arms. The forest, which had once felt like a sanctuary, was now a terrifying maze. Every tree a potential obstacle, every shadow a hiding place for the thing that was chasing him. He could feel its presence right behind him, a cold spot in the air, a suffocating pressure that seemed to suck all the warmth and life out of the world. He risked a single, fleeting glance over his shoulder. The faceless woman was there, much closer now, her blank head tilted to one side as she glided through the woods with an eerie, unnatural grace. That image, the image of that smooth, featureless face, was burned into his mind forever. Caleb burst out of the woods and into the small dirt pull-off where he'd parked his truck, stumbling and gasping for air. He fumbled frantically with his keys, his hand shaking so badly he could barely fit the key into the ignition. He didn't look back towards the tree line. He didn't want to know if she had followed him out. The engine roared to life, and he slammed the truck into reverse, peeling out of the pull-off and speeding down the winding mountain road, leaving a cloud of dust and gravel in his wake. He drove for miles, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his eyes wide with terror, not slowing down until the familiar lights of his small town came into view. He burst through the front door of his house, scaring his wife Sarah and their 2 young children. He was pale, covered in scratches, and babbling incoherently about a woman in the woods, a woman with no face. Sarah tried to calm him down, thinking he must have seen a bear or had a bad fall and hit his head. She checked him for injuries, but aside from the superficial scratches, he was physically unharmed. The harm, however, was much deeper. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, that smooth, blank oval of skin, the old dress, the way she moved. He was convinced she had followed him home. The haunting started subtly. It began with strange noises in the house at night, faint scratching sounds coming from the walls, the sound of soft footsteps in the hallway when everyone was in bed. Caleb would lie awake for hours listening, his body rigid with fear. Sarah tried to rationalize it, blaming the sounds on the old house settling or the wind. But then, things escalated. Objects would move on their own. A cup would slide across the kitchen counter, a child's toy would suddenly turn on in the middle of the night. A framed photo on the wall would be found turned face down in the morning. Caleb knew it was her. He felt her presence in the house, a cold and malevolent energy that seemed to cling to him like a shroud. His children started having nightmares, waking up screaming about a blank lady in their rooms. His daughter claimed she saw a woman with no face staring at her from the backyard through her bedroom window. Sarah, who had initially been skeptical, could no longer deny that something was terribly wrong. The once happy and peaceful home had become a place of constant fear and anxiety. The faceless woman of Black Bear Ridge had not stayed in the woods. She had followed Caleb home, and she wasn't leaving. The family's life was turned upside down. Caleb, once a confident and easygoing man, became a shell of his former self. He was plagued by paranoia and anxiety, jumping at every shadow, every unexpected noise. He refused to go anywhere near the woods, and he couldn't even look at the mountains looming in the distance without being overcome by a wave of panic. He installed extra locks on the doors and windows, boarded up the window in his daughter's room, and slept with a light on. But none of it helped. The feeling of being watched, of being haunted by that featureless face, was relentless. It was a psychological torment that was slowly breaking him down. Desperate, Caleb started researching local legends and folklore, hoping to find some explanation, some way to fight back. He spoke to some of the town's older residents, people whose families had lived in the shadow of those mountains for generations. They listened to his story with grim, knowing expressions. They told him he was lucky to have escaped with his life. They spoke in hushed tones of the faceless woman, a spirit said to haunt Black Bear Ridge. Some legends claim she was the ghost of a woman who had been horribly disfigured in an accident and had taken her own life in the woods, her spirit now forever searching for the face she had lost. Other stories were darker. They said she was not a ghost at all, but something much older, an ancient entity of the woods that wore the guise of a woman, a creature that would steal the faces and then the souls of those who wandered too far into its territory. The one common thread in all the tales was a stark warning. If you see her, you must not let her see you. And if she starts to follow, you must never, ever lead her home. A warning that Caleb had learned far too late. The activity in their house continued, and even their neighbors began to report strange sightings. A fleeting glimpse of a woman in an old-fashioned dress standing in the ward's yard at night, only to vanish when they looked again. Eventually, the constant fear became too much to bear. Caleb and Sarah made the difficult decision to sell their home and move hundreds of miles away, hoping to leave the mountains and the horrifying memory of the faceless woman behind them. They wanted a fresh start, a place where their children wouldn't be afraid to sleep in their own beds. But some things can't be left behind. Even in their new home, far from the Appalachians, Caleb reported that sometimes, on the darkest nights, he would catch a glimpse of a figure standing at the edge of their property, a familiar silhouette with a horrifyingly blank face, a constant, silent reminder that some horrors once seen will follow you forever. These stories, from the impossible staircase that leads to nowhere to the deadly lure of the lantern man to the terrifying pursuit of the faceless woman, are more than just campfire tales designed to give you a quick scare. They are woven into the very fabric of the Appalachian Mountains, some of the oldest and most mysterious mountains on Earth. They serve as warnings etched into the ancient stone and whispered on the wind through the dense, dark forests. They are stark and chilling reminders that there are some places we were never meant to go, some phenomena we were never meant to witness, and some mysteries that were never, ever meant to be solved. Because in these mountains, in these deep shadowed hollows and on these remote, silent ridges, the past isn't dead. It isn't even past. It's alive, it's breathing, and sometimes it's waiting just off the trail for the next curious hiker to wander by. It's a place where the veil between our world and another is thin, and where crossing that line can have permanent, terrifying consequences. The legends persist because the experiences persist passed down through generations, not as fiction, but as a genuine and fearful truth about the ancient power that resides in the heart of Appalachia. So, of the 3 stories you heard today, which one sent the most chills down your spine? Was it the architectural anomaly of the staircase, the ghostly light of the lantern man, or the featureless horror of the faceless woman? Have you ever had your own encounter with the unexplained, whether in the mountains or somewhere else entirely? We'd love to hear your own strange and scary stories, so please share them with us in the comments section below. There's a certain comfort in knowing you're not the only one who has seen something they can't explain. And if you enjoyed being terrified and want to explore more dark legends, unsolved mysteries, and true horror stories, then please be sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. We appreciate every single one of you who watches, and we can't wait to share more strange, dark, and mysterious tales with you. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. Stay curious, but please, stay safe.